Okay, this is David Goldenberg, and I'm joined today by Elisha, a new member of our team at 11 Ads for Brands, and we're starting training from scratch. So, Elisha, you want to say hi to our audience?
Hi, how are you guys doing?
We are we're doing great, and I'm sure the audience is doing great as well. And what is, I think, unique about this is that we're sharing the exact training that Elisha is going to be getting from now for a month, basically, 3 weeks to a month, covering Amazon ads from keyword research, bidding, ad creation, generating and downloading reports, analyzing them. Hopefully we'll also get to more advanced things using Claude for data analysis, using ChatGPT for image generation, and so forth. And so you guys get to tag along like a fly on the wall and just watch the whole thing through and learn from the basics up to probably we'll get to intermediate level stuff by the end of this training. And it's at no cost. I hope you guys find it valuable. And if you want to work with a PPC agency that has scaled brands, literally adding tens of millions of dollars in revenue, get in touch at 11adsforbrands.com. So to begin with, we're just going to talk about some basic concepts in ads. Elisha is a real person. He just preferred not to have his face filmed, and that's why you guys are seeing a robot there on Google Meet. That's Google Meet's filters. So let's pretend this is the ad cycle. Okay. And the idea of the ad cycle is that there's essentially some people break this up into 3 steps. And the faster you can go through the steps of the cycle, the more frequently you can do it, then the more profitable you get. Because ads aren't just profitable from having some great creative idea, even though everybody loves to watch the funny ads on the Super Bowl and so forth. But they get profitable by going around this loop as many times as possible in the same amount of time or in the least amount of time possible. So those 2 steps are research / data analysis, and that leads us to execution, right? Implementing the ideas that you get based on your research and data analysis. What's the difference, just quickly, between research and data analysis? Research you usually do when you don't have some data of your own to look at. So for example, if you're launching a new product, if you are creating new sponsored brands and you don't know yet what the best message is to use in your headline, in your video, etc., what pages to link to in your brand store, and what products to show, right? What particular variations in your catalog would do best. So those are times where you'll be doing research, and data analysis I would call more when you're looking, even though research also obviously involves data analysis, I use that here more to mean when you're looking at your own data, for example, search term reports, campaign reports, video sponsored brand or sponsored product video reports, etc., that you can generate through the interface, and then pick that apart to figure out where you're doing well, where you're not doing well, so you can do more of what's working and do less or stop the things that aren't working. So execution is where you take those ideas, those hypotheses from the research and data analysis step and go ahead to execute. Now, if we want to break this down further, essentially there are 3 levers, okay, that you can use. The first one is your targeting. The second one is the pricing. And the third one is your messaging. Now, these are very broad, and you'll see that each of these includes more than what many people may traditionally understand to be messaging or targeting. And I'll explain also what I mean by pricing. So targeting, in a plain sense, means who you're choosing to show your ad to, but it also means who you're choosing not to show your ad to. So in general, you want to start at least with a targeting that is most relevant, the most narrow definition of your audience, so longer tail keywords, keywords that have more specs in there, and eventually work your way up once you have enough reviews and your pricing is sufficiently competitive, etc., to where you can target more mid-tail and head-tail keywords. When I say tail, for those of you who aren't familiar, I'm talking about this concept known as the long tail. So if we have here a chart showing popularity, okay, so the popularity of keywords looks like this. Basically, there are 2 or 3 elements. So where our vertical axis is searches per month, per week, whatever, doesn't matter. Okay. And then our horizontal axis, is the number of keywords. Sorry, the other way around. Excuse me. Yes, sorry. Over here, you've got searches per month. Okay. And over here, you've got the number of keywords. Okay. So if we break this down into 2 parts, or 3 parts, depending, you can do it this way, like this. So this is called the short tail over here. This area is called the short tail, and it's basically keywords. If I show you the intersection, for example, over here, right? So at this point in orange, there's a lot of searches per month, right? But there's just a very small number of keywords that have that kind of enormous volume, right? And those are called the head keywords. This is the head of the tail. Then you've got the mid-tail keywords. Oh, sorry. This area. These are lower popularity keywords than the head, but they've still got a decent monthly volume. And they're also limited in the number of keywords that have that. And then as you go down to searches per month approaching 0, then the number of keywords with that volume of searches also expands basically to infinity, right? Because you could have somebody just search something once in a lifetime of Amazon's existence, whatever, and that would register somewhere, somewhere over here, basically, right? So one search a year would be somewhere there, maybe one search a month would be somewhere there, and so forth. Okay, but
did that also have a name to that section?
Yeah, this is called the long tail, basically. So
Long tail?
This area over here is the long tail. You have such distributions in other things besides keywords, but for our purposes, this is enough. Mid and short up over here. Okay. The short tail, the mid tail, and the long tail. Okay, so I know my paint graphic skills are overwhelming. Try to keep the applause to yourself because it'll just be disturbing for the audience. Fine. So in terms of the targeting, it's the keywords that you try to show your ads on. However, there's also competitive targeting. So if we open a browser tab and go over to Amazon, oh, that's strange. Okay, here we go. Right. So if I go to any individual product, what you'll see is that Amazon also shows sponsored product ads over here on product detail pages, right? This is the page where you see the product details. And you also have over here what's called sponsored brand videos also showing up on the product detail page. They can alternately show up at the very top of the page in a very thin bar. Here's some more sponsored products. See, this is sponsored, this one's sponsored. Some of these are organic. This row is all sponsored, and so forth. Okay, so I was scrolling down because sometimes they have also a sponsored display ad showing down here. Sponsored display, I'm trying to find an example to show. I don't see one on this particular page. Fine. If we go to maybe some of the competitors, they might show us. I think let's try not to charge people money. Oh, these are not competitors, these are all Nike. So if I'm Nike, right, one of the things that I want to do is I want to dominate this whole area. That's called defensive ASIN targeting. Okay. And if I want to show up on my competitors' product detail pages, we call that offensive ASIN targeting. And I'm using ASIN as if somebody who's new to this knows what I'm talking about. But ASIN is basically the Amazon, I think, standard identifying number. Basically the product ID within Amazon's catalog. You can see that in a URL after these keywords and DP, which is, I think, detail page. So they'll show you the Amazon ASIN right there after the DP /. So you have that kind of targeting, and then you have various mixes. For example, you have automatic targeting, which will show you both for keywords in search results pages as well as on product pages. You have category targeting, which essentially does the same thing, but based on slightly different criteria, and so on and so forth. So that's in terms of your deliberate targeting. There's also negative targeting. So for example, you can have a negative keyword. For example, if I'm targeting Nike men's shoes, right? So if I only want to sell, I'm advertising a white model, for example, that doesn't have a black variation. So I might negate the word black so that any search term using the word black won't trigger my ad to show. For example, if somebody types Nike men's shoes black, if I have negated the word black as a negative phrase, so it won't show up over there. So that's an example of negative targeting. There are other ones as well. For example, with category refinements or excluding certain brands or products with those kinds of campaigns. With pricing, essentially what we're talking about is bidding. Amazon ads and most ads sold online today are sold as part of an auction. And as in any auction, you need to bid. The ads aren't sold necessarily to the highest bidder. They're sold to whoever makes Amazon the most money. And the reason that's not the same thing as a person who bids the most is because of the following formula. Let's expand this downwards a little bit. What Amazon is trying to optimize for, and this is true not just for Amazon, but essentially Google and everybody else in the ad world, is what they call CPM, okay, which stands for cost per mille. Mille is French for 1,000. Basically, how much they get to charge for showing your ad 1,000 times. However, there's a bit of a problem here because they don't charge you usually on a impression basis for just showing the ad. They charge you on a CPC basis, which is cost per click. And so the question becomes, how do I translate from one to the other? And so the idea is you take your bid, okay, per click, and you multiply that by the click-through rate, or CTR, which is a percentage of people who click on the ad. And that will give you the maximum amount that Amazon can earn from that advertiser's ad. So max that Amazon can earn. Sorry, I need to modify this. Bid per click times click-through rate times 1,000 impressions, right? And that will essentially give you the CPM, okay? The maximum CPM that Amazon stands to gain from an advertiser. So just to put some actual numbers to that to make it a little bit less abstract, suppose that, let's save this and make a new file. Save as PNG ads intro. Okay. File new. We've got a nice blank canvas. So if I have one advertiser, John, who bids $1 per click and has a click-through rate of 1% on his ad. And I've got advertiser Jacob, who bids only 50 cents per click. Okay, but he has a click-through rate of 3%. Then what happens is that the CPM over here is going to be 1 times 0.01, 0.01, right, times 1,000. And that is going to give us, let me just do this, 1, 2, I think a CPM of $10 per 1,000 impressions, if I'm not mistaken. Alicia, feel free to correct me if I've gotten that mixed up, but I think that's correct. Okay, and the second advertiser, so even though he's just bidding 50 cents, excuse me, because he's got a 3% click-through rate, then what happens is that his CPM works out to $15.
Correct. Both those numbers are correct with the calculator.
Right. So Amazon or Google or whoever it is would rather show Jacob's ad ahead of John's ad. Now, does that mean they won't show John's ad? In some cases, if there's only one impression available, one slot for an advertiser, then they won't. But if we go back to Amazon for a second, so there's only one slot over here at the top for a sponsored brand. So Adidas are defending their brand term over here. But then if you look over here, no bull, I don't know if deliberately or by accident because they're just targeting men's shoes black, are showing up over here even ahead of Adidas and ahead of Marc Joseph New York. And so the reason most probably is that Amazon stands to gain more, right, to earn a higher cost per 1,000 impressions from Noble's ads as opposed to Adidas or Marc Joseph New York. And the same thing applies also if we were to click through on any of these and look at the row of sponsored products down the page. Oh, here's a sponsored display that I mentioned earlier, and here's another one. So those are a couple other ad formats. And the reason, so over here where there's just one possibility, so these guys are beating out the runners up for these ad slots in sponsored display. Then over here, FeeFit is beating out Pujix. But the point is essentially that these guys probably make Amazon more money per click than these other guys. My guess is that they're going for volume and this guy is very much not so. As you can see, it's an orthopedic shoe, and so he's charging way more. And even this guy is only charging $10 more. Okay, so these guys over here are making more money than the people further on. And it's not just that you bid per click. As we'll see later on, there are adjustments that you can bring to your bid for a range of things. So here are a couple of them. So you can adjust your bids for placements, okay? Literally the area and the page that you're shown on. So whether that is top of search, let's give this a nice color, top of search. You can also have rest of search. Product pages. There are placements for, bid adjustments, not just for placements, but also for audiences. I'll just give a few examples. We're not going to go through every possible bid adjustment, but for example, high likelihood to purchase. There's people who've clicked to your product page before or added to cart. Clicked or added to cart. There's new to brand, which is useful for people who are trying to increase their total market share, especially for subscriptions, right? For example, Amazon allows people to do subscribe and save, which is really helpful if you're selling a consumable product such as soap or toilet paper or hand cream or food, etc. You've got Amazon Business, which is sort of a niche within Amazon as well. You can have an adjustment for, and you've got another one currently for sponsored product videos. Product videos, meaning if your ad has a video attached to it, if your sponsored product ad has a video attached to it, then you can bid more for that as well. And basically these also compound. So we can deal with the math later, but basically if John has a $1 per click bid, and he's also got an adjustment for top of search and for high likelihood audience, as well as for sponsored product videos, and even for Amazon Business. So what happens is they take his dollar click, multiply or add on basically an extra 30% for top of search, if that's his adjustment, let's say, for argument's sake, 30%. So that's $1.30. Then he's got another 10% adjustment, let's say, for high likelihood audience. So that $1.30 gets multiplied by 110%, meaning he ends up with a bid of $1.43, right? 10% of $1.30 is 13 cents. So now he's at $1.43. He gives another 10% for Amazon Business, so $1.43 times 110%, right? That'll take him to something like $1.57. Add, let's say, another 100% boost for sponsored product videos. So suddenly he's gotten himself to something like $3 almost when he started out with just a basic bid of $1. And it's important to mention that because a lot of people just think that when they adjust, it's only working on itself. But if there's somebody who has a high likelihood to purchase according to Amazon's algorithm, and your ad is showing on top of search, so then these will multiply together, right? If they scroll down and the ad is showing up in rest of search, so then they don't multiply, obviously, or if they're browsing on a product page, so they don't multiply, right? But you have many situations where they can multiply. It's important to keep that in mind.
Do you put values for each one, or is it like a binary choice? Like for the high likelihood, is it just an on-off switch, or do you put in the value percentage or?
Excellent question. Yeah, it's not binary on-off. You choose the percentage. For the placements, it's up to 900%, I believe. For audiences, I think it's up to 100% boost. To date, I haven't seen a reason to boost beyond about 60 or 70%. In most cases, about 20 to 30% is sufficient for our purposes. Amazon Business, the same. Sponsored product videos, the same. But I don't remember exactly what the maximum limit is percentage-wise.
Do you have a standard approach do you have a standard approach for these choices for most of your products, or is it very per
Excellent.
product?
Yeah, excellent question. Is there a standard approach? How much we bid for top of search, rest of search, audiences, etc.? Yes, we do. Happy to get into more detail on that when we get there. For now, it's sufficient to understand that our bid is not just at the target level, right? So this bid over here is going to be at the target level, e.g. keyword, okay? Whereas these bids over here are going to apply at the campaign level. Okay, I should make a note of that. And therefore, if you have multiple targets in one campaign, the math can get a little bit tricky because you might, essentially you have to just adjust for the average in such a scenario. Campaign level. Okay. Now, in addition to all of these, there's an additional option for some of the ads on Amazon. There's a couple of additional options. Just cover this briefly. Bidding strategy. So you have up, down, down, and fixed. So up, down means you allow Amazon to increase or decrease your bid according to whether they think you're more likely or less likely to convert the visitor to a sale. Down is you don't let them increase, but you will allow them to decrease if they think you're less likely to convert that visitor to a sale. And fixed means they don't adjust your bids at all. This is currently only available on sponsored products. And there's an option available currently for sponsored display to bid per conversion, which makes life a whole lot simpler, because if you know you're willing to pay, let's say 20% of your price, right? If you're selling for $10, you're willing to pay $2 for that conversion. So actually, it's not a good example because the minimum is $5. Let's say your product costs $50, okay? And you're willing to pay $10 a conversion rate, 20%. So you can just put down in sponsored display $10 per conversion and call it a day. Okay, so these are some of the pricing levers that we have within Amazon. When you do negative targeting, that indirectly affects all of this as well. And conversely, if you have more relevant keywords or ASIN targets, then the better your traffic, the more relevant, the more likely to convert, essentially, based on who you're showing your ad to, then that affects everything else, right? Because it's a second place auction, meaning even though Amazon could charge this guy up to $15 CPM, in practice what they do is they work this back out to how much that would be on a cost per click basis. And they just charge Jacob basically a penny more than what they would make from Jon. So essentially $10 and 1 penny CPM, or whatever the cost per click works out to, plus 1 penny to beat Jon. And the idea behind this is that they want to induce advertisers to bid the maximum that they're willing to pay for that click. And in order to do that, they want to reassure you that, hey, just because you bid, let's say, 50 cents doesn't mean I'm necessarily going to charge you 50 cents, right? It's dynamic, it depends on the competition and so forth, and depends also on how high your click-through rate is. If your ad is more relevant, right, such as over here, we have a higher click-through rate, then he also doesn't need to pay as much per click in order to have his ad shown. And therefore, there's an incentive to target as precisely as possible so that you pay as little as possible for your clicks, and obviously so you get the most sales possible. Then so that is the pricing lever. And the third lever that we've got is messaging. Okay, so over here, let's talk about messaging. And messaging breaks down into a whole bunch of different things on Amazon. And the same way that they appear differently on the page, the advertisers control also over the creative of the ad varies. So if we look over here, this is called a sponsored brand collection ad. And essentially you have your logo, your headline. This is an older product collection. You can tell because there's more than 32 characters. And you've got 3 featured products. If we were to click on this headline, it would take us to Adidas landing page, probably in their brand store. And we would be able to see over there what they are showing to visitors. I don't want to charge them for nothing. I'm not actually shopping for Adidas shoes. So we'll leave that for now. But you can do all kinds of things to customize your brand store and to customize your landing page to order the products in a way that maximizes your chance of getting the sale, to include upsells or cross-sells on the landing page as well. To show that the page is more relevant, you have a graphic header that in your sponsored brand, in your brand store, which you can customize to match the keywords that you're targeting. So for example, if I go to this store, right, so over here on 100-foot solar string lights, right, so solar string lights obviously is a keyword that this page would want to have its products shown for in terms of advertising, maybe also 100-foot. And you can see here there's an upsell as well, cross-sell, trying to get a bit of an extra average order value by having people buy hooks to tie their string lights into pergolas, things like that. The messaging, so that's in terms of the sponsored brands product collection. That's one of 3 formats they have. When I look at product ads over here, so these are sponsored product ads, and they look, as you can see, essentially identical to regular product listings, right? These aren't sponsored, but these ones are. And the only real difference between them is that this one says sponsored and the others don't. But you have the same size of an image. You have the brand at the top. You have the product description over here, the review score and the number of reviews, the number of units sold in the past month, the price. This limited time deal is not because it's a sponsored ad. It's just because they happen to be having a deal, but you could get that organically as well. And the rest of these things they can see here, the add to cart button, etc. Same thing here. This bestseller badge doesn't show up because it's advertised. It shows up because they are in fact a bestseller within their subcategory, I want to guess, within men's shoes. Okay, so over here there isn't that much control over the creative separately from the product listing. If you want to control the ad creative, so you have to update your product listing in a way that will make the ad more appealing. So you can see over here they're putting the word water resistant and food service. So they've got that also shown here in the ad with a splash, trying to draw attention to the fact that this is great if, for example, you're working in a restaurant or some other food service thing where you're likely to come into contact with spilled drinks and so forth, and you don't want to slip. So that's one way you can try to get your ad to pop more if it's sponsored products. You want to include here different keywords as well that are relevant to the keywords that you're targeting with your advertising. And you can also put here benefits, right? So water resistant may not even be something that people search for. It may or may not be. But in any case, it's a benefit, right? Or non-slip, same idea, right? I don't want to slip. That's the benefit. So they're showing that over there. Then over here, you've got a sponsored brand video. And obviously the video itself is a key part of what you can customize. They're linking this directly to a product page, but you could link it instead to a brand store. And what that does is it also gives you a headline that shows up over here, similar to the headline we saw here at the top of the page. And in addition, by taking them to the brand store, you are more likely to convert than just taking them directly to a product page, because that will tend to turn the decision from a yes, no, I'm interested in this particular shoe, to do I want this shoe or something else within Feet Hit's catalog. Okay, here's another sponsored brand. You can see this is the newer sponsored brand collection. They're under 32 characters, but they're also showing a lot more products. There's a logo, and this link and the headline link will take them to the brand store. I think the logo may take them to the brand store homepage as opposed to the precise landing page. Not 100% sure on that. Here's another sponsored display. They can show up like this. You have the logo, you have the product image, and you have text box. This text could just be the product title, but you can also customize a headline over here if you like. You can use a custom image or a custom video on the sponsored display listings. I hope you've memorized all of this because we're having a quiz in about 2 minutes.
Yeah.
All right.
Do you often do customization for these ads, or do you go with the default like presented here?
Excellent question. So if you want to get things running and you don't have sponsored display running at all, so I wouldn't wait until you have some custom image. I would just go ahead and get it launched so that you can start collecting data, see which targets work, which targets don't work, whether you need to adjust your bids higher or lower. Why would you adjust them higher? Because that would get you more traffic, as we were talking about earlier in discussing the auction. You might adjust it lower if you see that you're paying too much per order. And likewise, if you don't have a video, I wouldn't necessarily wait until you have a video to show. I would just go ahead and do it. But if you have, then that typically can get you higher conversion rates and therefore more profitable advertising. So definitely worth doing. Okay. Something that's very underused, and it's one of the specialties. Hopefully we'll get to teaching you that soon.
Another question, I'm sorry.
Please.
When you start selling a new product, like it's like you just added this product to your
catalog
page, how many campaigns do you run for that one product starting out? Do you run multiple campaigns with small adjustments?
Right, fantastic question. So when you have a brand new product, how many campaigns do you run for that? So when it's brand new and has 0 views, I generally would discourage anybody from running ads. We certainly will not run ads for a product that has 0 views because the conversion rate tends to be quite low. You're hoping people will take a chance on you, and given the vast choice of products on Amazon, that tends not to be the case unless you've got some
So how many reviews do you think is necessary to have before you start getting started with the advertisements?
So how many reviews do you need before you start advertising your product? Amazon used to recommend, I think, 15 product reviews once upon a time. I would say, again, it depends on how competitive your category is. Like you can see over here in men's black running shoes, you're competing with products that have thousands of reviews. So would I just go ahead based on 15 reviews? Probably not. I would wait till I had 30, maybe even 100. But there's a few ways to speed that up. So they have something called the Vine program, where basically you give away products to Amazon customers, and in exchange they have to leave a review. An additional way to work with that is that if you have product variations, then you can, if they're very close variations, then Amazon will combine the reviews, right? For example, if it's just color, black versus gray or what have you, then Amazon will combine those reviews. So you could have, and the reason this matters is because you're limited in how many Vine reviews you can get.
Okay.
So if you have 4 or 5 color variations, right? I forget what the limit is right now on Vine, but if it's, let's say, 30 reviews, so you can do 30 reviews times 4 color variations, and that gets you to 120 reviews in pretty quick order. Amazon also did something a couple years ago where they said to leave a review, you just need to click a star rating. You don't need to actually write anything, which makes it a lot easier for most people. And that just exploded the number of reviews, and then they just changed the wording to ratings and reviews. But for practical intents and purposes, these numbers are a lot more impressive, right, than if they had a tenth of that, for example. So that is something that direct-to-consumer brands might consider also doing on their own websites. See, so Adidas is probably not going to advertise the men's Run Falcon 6, even though it's got very good reviews and showing full 5 stars, because 15 reviews is just 15 reviews. To answer your other question, how many campaigns? There's a whole bunch. So there's something called automatic targeting for sponsored products. And within that, there's 4 different categories of automatic targeting. Not just that, but those 4 categories can each get you into top of search, rest of search, as well as product pages. And
was that the defensive SIN and offensive SIN, or are those under the automatic targeting, or they're separate?
No, the placements are just what they sound like. So over here, this is top of search placement. Okay, none of these over here are sponsored, but this is what's called top of search. Beyond this over here, for example, would be called rest of search, and so forth. And then you have product detail pages. If I click over here, so any one of the 4 automatic targeting could take you to any of these slots on the page, provided that your bid and click-through rate are high enough. And therefore, it's a good idea to separate each of the automatic match targetings into its own campaign so that you can better appreciate what search terms you showed up for and better interpret the data. We'll get to that later. So you would have probably 4 campaigns for automatic. You would have keyword targeting campaigns. How many depends on how many different keywords are relevant to this product, how many different specs there are. The more synonyms there are for a product, then the more keywords you would have for it, essentially. So that favors advertisers who spend time to do that deep keyword research, as opposed to people who just throw together a listing and a product real quick and say, okay, let's go.
Okay.
And then you'd have also product targeting to target your competitors' ASINs. But you can also use those to show up on search results. Amazon translates, for example, if you target this Adidas shoe to show up, even though you're targeting this, you would think that you'll just show up on their page, but in fact, it will also show you on search, and probably to people who've browsed this shoe before. Therefore, you need to consider, do I compare favorably or unfavorably to this particular shoe? And according to that, do I want to show up there? Do I want to show up in search results maybe alongside it. It's not, Amazon are not really transparent as to how they match the ASIN targeting to search keywords. As far as I'm aware, if anybody in the audience has information contrary, I'd be happy to hear it, but I'm pretty sure they don't disclose how they translate those product targets into keywords and search terms.
Okay.
So you would have that. Optionally, you might also do category targeting. I would probably leave that for a little bit later once you've gotten even more views and that you've also figured out what your competitive positioning is in the market. Because you might think, you might have a plan that you're going to be the premium or you're going to be the cheap price or you're going to be somewhere in the middle, whatever. And then when the wheels hit the road, suddenly you have to adapt and the original plan goes out the window fairly quickly and you find this is my niche and that's not, and so forth.
Yep.
So in terms of numbers, I would venture a guess, if we say maybe 5 to 10 keyword targeted campaigns plus the 4 automatic plus product targeting, I would say somewhere between 10 to 20 to start, but you could easily go way over that depending on how you organize your campaigns. That's something we can talk about later because it's a very important topic, how you organize your campaigns, how many products you have per campaign, how many targets per campaign, how many placements you're targeting, how you do your bid adjustments, because all of that will affect your ability to read the data later on, because the data in many cases is on a campaign level. You get campaign level reporting for your placements, for example. And so if you have multiple targets, then the placement data is actually just showing you the average of all the targets. So you don't really know if one placement is doing all the sales on top of search and wasting money at product pages, but another one is compensating because it's selling on product pages, or how things are broken down. Conversely, if you try to just put one keyword per campaign, so one, you'll have a lot of bloat, a lot of campaigns that just don't generate traffic. But more importantly, a lot of them won't get traffic because Amazon is trying to minimize its risk. And for each new keyword and target pairing, plus your placements and the other stuff, they need to figure out how likely they are to get the click and possibly also how likely they are to get the sale, according to those people who think that Amazon Ads cares whether or not you convert. That's subject to debate. But they're running all kinds of back-end AI to show your ads to whoever they think will click on it. So for example, if you're selling winter tires and it's the spring, you're probably not going to have your ads shown in Texas, but there's a pretty good chance that they'll show your ads in Vermont, right? Because there's still snow in Vermont in March. And so since there's no geographic targeting available in either sponsored products, sponsored brands, or sponsored display as of now, they do all that stuff in the back end. And so if you have 5 keywords that generated data for a campaign, right? So you've got more data in that campaign, and they also know that this thing works better in Vermont than in Texas, or for older or younger audiences, or, you know, Samsung versus iPhone, a million different layers of targeting and audience segmentation that they just do in the back end without sharing with you. And when you launch a new campaign, then there's none of that history. So to a significant degree, the history factor of the algorithm encourages you essentially to add more keywords to existing campaigns, or to make campaigns with multiple keywords, because that way Amazon can optimize faster and also calculate these things more efficiently, whereas a new campaign won't learn from the other campaign, even though it's the same product. It It might even be the same keyword and the same bid as you have in another campaign, but they won't learn from them because there's all this history built up there and they've figured it out for these particular segments, whereas that new campaign doesn't have that intelligence carried over.
I have a small question.
Please.
So I'm not too familiar with the exact Amazon platform with the how it exactly it's managed.
Yeah.
But if let's say if you have a campaign and you want to keep its history, but then you also want to make some adjustments, is it like are there possibilities to split the campaign or to make a duplicate of it so it still continues with the history, but then now you can start making separate adjustments to it, like in parallel?
Yeah, excellent question. Yes, you can definitely duplicate the campaign. You can do that manually. You can do that using what's called bulk operations. So basically a spreadsheet in a particular format that you upload to Amazon and tells them create one or more campaigns or adjust my existing campaigns in this way. So you can definitely do that. But when you make that new campaign, it won't have the history of the old campaign. You can tell it, hey, learn from this other campaign that I'm copying. And so that's a point of what I was saying earlier. Even though in terms of control and in terms of interpreting your data, you're better off having just one placement and one product and one target per campaign, in practice, Amazon often won't give traffic to those campaigns, especially if it's not a head keyword, right? One of those that has a lot of search volume per month. So you could create the campaigns, but it just won't go anywhere kind of thing. You'll just have a negligible amount of impressions and clicks, so you can't really optimize or do very much with that. Okay, so we've seen over here some of the front end of what the things look like and what our levers are, right? So we have, in terms of messaging, we talked about the headlines in sponsored brands and sponsored display. Okay, we talked about the main images and titles for sponsored products, but of course the images also show up in sponsored brands and display. So we'll mark it like that. Sometimes they'll show up in sponsored brands, sometimes not. Amazon is kind of always testing this out in their formatting. The titles, the images, of course, show. And in display, like we said earlier, depends if you use a custom image or not, or a custom headline or not. You've got the video, right? So it's not just the images, but you can also and should also use text within the video itself. And the reason is that the ads play automatically on mute. And 99.9% of plays don't get unmuted, i.e. it runs for however long a person chooses to watch it or not on mute. So if you have voiceover, that's just a total waste. What you need to do is have text over, meaning just write out the script over the visuals and make sure that it doesn't cover something essential. So typically you'll put that at the bottom third of the screen to detail what you're showing in the image if it's not necessarily 100% obvious from the picture, or if you want to specify a certain benefit. Okay.
You could put that custom text within the Amazon Marketplace, within the site, or do you have to do that with your own video editor?
With your own, good question. Within your own video editor, Amazon does provide video creation tools. They're decent. We can talk about them when we get to video creation. We use a mix of that as well as Canva, as well as just sourcing original live video, not just or sort of slideshow style of a rotation of images, basically. And then you have what's called the Store Spotlight ads. We didn't see an example. It's a format within the sponsored brands type. And so you've got display names for the pages you link to, the store pages you link to. as well as the image that you choose, which has to be an image that appears on that store page. It's display names and product images. Let's lift this a bit higher. Okay. So this is essentially what you've got under messaging. And there's a whole bunch of ways to manipulate this stuff and work on it. We saw a few examples. I propose we take a little break for now. Maybe 5 minutes, stretch legs, 10 minutes, and come back.
All right, sounds good. I'll be ready to go once you're ready.
Excellent. Okay, I'm just pausing the recording for now.
Okay.
Awesome. Okay, we're back from our commercial break, which is what you do when you are training in an ad agency. And we talked about how the process of advertising is not just about getting lucky or just about being creative and having some really entertaining advertisement that is successful out of the box. But it's about this process of research and data analysis that leads to execution, that generates more data for you to analyze, come up with better ideas, and execute again. And the faster you can go through this, then the more profitable your ads can get. Because with each cycle, essentially what you're doing is you're coming up with better targeting. You're making the pricing more accurate relative to your product margins and so forth. You're tailoring the messaging in a way that speaks more to your audience, so they're more likely to click, they're more likely to buy, and so forth, right? And you're essentially pulling on these different levers. At the same time, Amazon ends up essentially making more money, because when you make more money, you can afford to spend more on the ads, and you get ideally into a virtuous cycle. There's some products that you just can't save, but most products fall somewhere into the middle, where they're not superstars out the gate and they're not terrible losers out the gate, but with hard work you can get them from middle of the pack to being winners and even big big hits, grand slam, whatever you want to call it. Okay, now let's get a little bit familiar with the first lever, okay, which is targeting. So in order to do that, we don't really need just yet to look at the ads interface. We can get to that in due time. But the most useful tool, right, that you can possibly have, bar none, is your own brain. And I've actually done this as an exercise at a conference where I was talking about keyword research. And I said to people, look, just talk to the person sitting next to you, which is a great thing to do at conferences because everybody wants to meet people there and make new connections and whatever, but most people are a little bit shy about talking to strangers, and so you're basically giving them an icebreaker when you do this. So I said to them, talk to the person sitting next to you, look at this picture that I'm putting up here on the slide, and describe this product in as many different ways as you can. And essentially it was this red motorcycle, and I spoke, it was a panel, so I moved away from the mic and spoke with one of the speakers there. And they thought of the word sports, right? Like a sport motorcycle, which was something that hadn't occurred to me. And essentially just brainstorming and looking at all the different specs, whatever, right? So you might have a particular kind of style of windshield, or you might have particular styles of handlebars, brakes, the colors, the strength of the motor, the size of the motor, etc., all these different things. As many different ways that you can think to describe the product as possible, right? So for example, these ones look like I don't think these are actually laces that you can tie. I think this is just some sort of elastics they put on as decoration, right? So for example, if somebody's interested in no lace running shoes, if I'm right, and these are actually just basically elastics there to decorate the shoe, then that might be something that Adidas could, for example, put in their product title as well as target for the keywords. So once you've got some basic ideas, right, what you want to do is go and see, am I right? What does Amazon tell me about this? So I go to the search bar and I put in men's shoes. Men's shoes doesn't matter too much. The suggestions probably be 90-95% overlapping. And you can see over here, the most popular ones, or the ones that Amazon makes the most money on, not necessarily from the advertising, but possibly also, are the ones that are going to be suggested here. Probably the ones they make most money on in the marketplace. Men's shoes sneakers, men's shoes casual, men's shoes Nike, slip-on, etc. It might also just be in terms of the popularity, but I don't think it's purely the popularity. And in addition to the ones that they suggest, by default, you can also have a look over here at this where they're narrowing down for men's shoes, sneakers by type. And this is also useful, as we can see later, for getting ideas if we're going to use a store spotlight ad, which links to pages in our store. Supposing that we had walking shoes and dress shoes and elevator shoes. So if we're making an ad for men's shoes, targeting this keyword, then we could link to pages in our store for walking shoes, dress shoes, and elevator shoes. Or we could have dress, elevator, and sock, etc. Fine. But you can mine this a lot more deeply. Okay, if you just start going through this alphabetically. So men's shoe A's. Oh, look at all the suggestions for A. Adidas, Athletic, Asics, Air Max, Aldo, Adidas Samba, Air Force, Arch Support, right? What happens if I do AB? Oh, Abrams, Stacey Abrams shoes. Okay, Joseph Abboud. Shock absorption, right? So we get additional ideas. We can see the prompts also. And if I want to optimize my listing, I want to find these prompts and include them as well in my product listings so that Amazon will hopefully show my product when somebody clicks on one of these or when they interact orally with Alexa to say out loud, hey Alexa, what are the differences between Stacey Abrams dress and casual shoes for men, etc. Right? So you can go through this with your whole alphabet. Apparently there's some ASCI, or maybe it's just a typo of ASICS. Achilles, right? Are you selling shoes for Achilles tendonitis, etc. And literally you can just go through the whole alphabet doing this. There's tools also which do this, so you don't need to do this yourself. You can also get a virtual assistant in, for example, the Philippines or wherever else to do these things. And this helps you also find additional prompts, which again, you can fill this data in your listing. Which men's black shoes are easiest to clean and maintain, right? So you might, if your shoes are easy to clean and maintain, for some reason, you might emphasize that in your listing. They're best for formal business occasions, right? They don't stand out too much. They're respectful and just allow you to focus on getting business done, for instance. What are key fit considerations for men's basketball shoes? Does it need to be super tight, have a little play, etc.?
I have a small question. Regarding a product page, or when you're doing an advertisement campaign, is there any settings where you can input to let Amazon's Alexa know to advertise for you? Like, is any part of the advertising campaign deal with Alexa and having her advertise for you within her chats or whatnot?
Good question. They show you in the reports which prompts triggered your ads. And then I believe you can, in our accounts, I haven't yet seen that actual data show up. So it might be a question of optimizing the listings, something we can discuss with our clients. But my understanding is that you can just opt out of certain prompts if they're not converting for you. And that's the extent of it. I don't think that you can use the advertising deliberately to show up for those prompts. And I think the reason is, if I'm not mistaken, that a lot of times they will just add a product directly to cart from the prompt. But I saw that in the email e-commerce newsletter I get. I'll be honest, this is not something I've used yet, so I don't know.
Like I'm wondering if you have a sale for your product that was derived from maybe ChatGPT or Amazon Alexa, if you have like indication that, oh, this came from one of the chat bots, or this came from one of the LLMs.
Oh, from a chat, if you have a sale that came from T research or searching or Claude, you wouldn't see that in your advertising reports within Amazon, because Amazon, for 99% of advertisers, there's some who do DSP or do off Amazon advertising, but that's a different question. I don't think that those ads are syndicated anyways to ChatGPT or other LLMs. But you would not see that in your ad reports. If you had your own website and you were driving traffic there, so you would see that in tools like Google Analytics and so on. Okay, so there's two uses for this kind of keyword research that we're doing over here. The first use is simply to find good keywords that we can target ourselves. The second use is to find bad keywords that we want to exclude, because it's just as important to exclude bad keywords as it is to include the good keywords, because when you target keywords, essentially, there's different ways that Amazon matches them to search terms, or what are called customer search terms. So a keyword is what you input into Amazon advertising, and you say, I want to target people who search for this or something like this, and we'll talk about what like this means in a minute. And the customer search term is what they actually either typed in or what they clicked on or agreed to the suggestion, whatever that suggestion might be. So when we're doing this research, if I were, for example, to target men's shoes basketball, now let's talk about the match types and you'll understand what I'll try to clarify this point. So we have keywords and we've got search terms. Okay, and there's a couple of differences that are important to understand, because they affect how we're actually able to optimize our campaigns to get them profitable. So first of all, this is what you target versus this is what you target in Amazon ads. And this is what the customer searched. Okay, now keywords come in two formats, basically. You have positive, that's what you're targeting, that you want to be included for, and you have negative, where you are explicitly telling Amazon, don't show me for this keyword, or for search terms that include this keyword. We can talk about that in a minute. And search terms, there's no positive or negative, it's just this is what they actually searched. Then keywords also, you can change your bid on, right?
1 second, you also mentioned for the keywords that you can also say similar, like if it's a like or if it's specific.
Yeah, that's the match type, so we'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
But you can adjust a bid for a search term, right? This is not something that you can adjust. Essentially, you can opt out with a negative keyword. You can opt out of search terms, or you can opt in with deliberate keyword targeting, positive targeting, but not adjustable at the bid level, right? You can't say, hey, Amazon, any search term that includes this word, I want to bid 50 cents for, or I want to bid an extra 30% for, or I want to bid $1 or an extra 100% or 150, whatever percent. the bidding is controlled by the keywords for all the search terms that they match to. So what does that mean? It works as follows. You've got 3 match types, okay, for positive keywords. Okay, so you've got exact match. You have phrase match. You have broad match. And for sponsored brands, I'll call this maybe 3.5 match types, if you will. Broad match modified. Okay, and the broad match itself varies, I think, in how it works in what I've observed between sponsored products and sponsored brands.
Okay.
So let's get into each of these right now.
Like, would you bid on each one of those aspects, or is it like, do you put like a specific bid on the broad match, specific bid on the exact match, or like?
Yes, exactly. So let's get to that. You're asking good questions. Let's have a look at each of those. Okay, and let's first define what we mean. Okay, so exact match, traditionally, and I'm emphasizing the word traditionally. So with exact match,
It's like the Google quotations when you're
no,
using quotations.
it's like the Google square brackets, if memory serves. So exact match means, in theory, and we'll see why, these exact words in this order with nothing before, between, after. Right? In theory, this is how exact match works. This is how it used to work. I'm seeing sponsored products working more like this nowadays. Sponsored brands a little bit differently. Okay, with sponsored products, like I said, mostly this is what we're seeing nowadays.
Okay.
With sponsored brands, and this applies more with phrase match and broad match, Amazon a few years ago introduced what they called intent matching. And so if they think that a search term matches the intent of what you're going for, even if it's not what you actually wrote explicitly into their ad system, they will still show your ad. And you can't opt in or opt out of intent matching. That's just a feature of the game. If you like it, that's great. If you don't like it, then you'll need to add negative keywords even in an exact match. And that might surprise a lot of people who are relying on old information, that exact match is just these words in this order with nothing before, in between, or after. We have seen in the past that they were more liberal even with exact match, but I think they've cut that down and have gotten more conservative again with how that's working. Let's continue talking about the other match types, and we can come back to intent matching soon. So just move over a little bit over here. Okay, let's do this. Okay. Phrase match. These words in this order with additions before, after. That was a traditional phrase match, okay? Nowadays, they also change the order around. So for example, if you have office chair as your keyword in phrase match, they will also show you for chair office.
Okay.
Okay. The additions are optional, meaning phrase match includes exact match, right? So if you have chair office and phrase, office chair and phrase match, you can just get office chair with nothing before, in the middle, or after. But you can also get additions before and after. I've forgotten specifically if they allow words in between. That can make a significant difference. We can look that up shortly in Amazon's documents, or we can just look at a search and report and see what happens in reality as opposed to what is claimed in theory. Moving on, with broad match, you have essentially two types. In sponsored products, in theory, it used to be the same between sponsored products and sponsored brands, which is that you could get these words any order with additions anywhere. Okay, before, middle, or after. Okay.
This is when you would just give them a list of keywords that you like?
No, it's not where you give them a list of keywords that you like. For example, if I target office chair on broad match, then I could get chair for modern office black, for example, right? So the order is different. They added words in the middle and words after. But my words would still have to show up there. Okay.
But so the order of it's arbitrary, but like you could give them a list of different keywords for broad match, but then the order itself is arbitrary because it can mix and match within itself since it's broad, correct?
When you say list, I'm not sure what you have in mind. Most people have in mind something like this, and that's not what I'm talking about. Okay, so for example, they have in mind office chair, black office chair, modern office chair. Okay, this is not a broad match target. This whole list together is not a broad match target. Any of these individually could be a broad match keyword, right? You could even, if you wanted, you could even just target chair on broad match, and then that would show you up for literally anything that has the word chair in it.
Okay.
Okay. You don't need a list like this, first keyword, second keyword, third keyword, for it to be broad match. Just office chair on its own can be broad match. I mean, it doesn't have to be office chair, right? This is just an example. Okay. Now with intent matching, this actually becomes quite broad, quite vague. So it could match to customer search terms, CST, such as Aeron style chair, right? Aeron is a company that pioneered a kind of office chair. And so even though this person hasn't even used the word office whatsoever, because there's an association between Aeron and office chairs, then broad match would be more likely to get this as a search term, although it could also appear under phrase or even exact, and therefore you would want to negate this if your office chair is not an Aeron style chair, right? For example, you have some big cushy leather chair for your office, something like that, then you would want to negate that. You could also get
like a corporate chair or professional chair.
Yeah, exactly. Professional chair, corporate chairs, seats, whatever. A lot of different ways to say similar things could show up because of intent matching, and with broad match in particular, more so in sponsored brands than in sponsored products, but really in both. So you can get intent matching, can get a whole range even without the targeted keywords. It could be even without any of the targeted keywords at all.
How much control do you have on the range? Like how can you control how far it spreads?
That's a problem. You don't have control over the range. What you have control over is negative keywords. And so you can use the negative keywords to block things. And so if you're intending to use broad match, so what you would want to do is do your keyword research first and say, okay, if this is my root keyword, if it's office chair, right? So if I'm going to do office chair, let's say.
Do you pay per the amount of negative keywords you use, or can
No,
you use
you can use as many negatives as you want.
Okay.
Okay, so office chair mat, right? If I'm selling office chairs, I would be pretty peeved to get office chair mat, right? One of those rolling things for the wheels to slide across more easily. So I would want to negate mat before I go with office chair broad match, right? If I'm not selling a cushion for office chair, I would want to negate the word cushion. Likewise, cover with footrest, right? Depending on my specs, if my thing doesn't have a footrest, so I would want to negate that as well, and so forth, right? And then you can do the same thing with the going through the alphabet like we discussed. So I would, in this case, negate arm covers, arm pads, adjustable arms. I could target deliberately or not, depending on whether or not my products in fact have adjustable arms or not. Accessories would be probably a pretty good one to negate, and so on. So far, so good?
Yep. I also wanted to just cover like another basic thing that you covered that you went over earlier.
Yep.
The CPM, like exactly where the cost incurred by us. Like you said, CPM is more about based off cost per 1,000 impressions, but in actuality, it's based off clicks. So we're all, like we pay based off the clicks of the customers on our ads, but not based
Correct.
off impressions, right?
Correct. There is an option to bid based on impressions in sponsored brands and sponsored display. I don't believe they have it for sponsored products. Generally, those are pretty bad. They have been to date pretty bad options. Amazon has recently introduced new reporting capabilities, which would allow you to basically get the truth about how your campaign is really performing. When you, in sponsored brands or sponsored display, if you bid based on impressions, then they also report on sales based on impressions. So if your ad was just shown to somebody and they didn't click on it, but eventually they bought your product, then Amazon would attribute the sale to your ad campaign, even though it got no clicks. And so you end up sometimes with situations which are so ridiculous as to have a 100% conversion rate, where literally every click turned into a sale, which never happens, because you're in fact cannibalizing you're taking credit for sales that happened organically just because there was an ad shown somewhere along their research process.
But misleading.
It can be definitely misleading. But with the new reporting, they allow you to see sales from clicks, and so you could, in theory, bid per 1,000 impressions, and then use the reporting on sales from clicks in order to figure out how profitable the ads were or not. However, in general, we haven't seen such ads perform well, number one. And number two, because that data would be mixed in with the rest of your account data, it would paint a fake picture of how you're doing and make things appear better than they really are, which I've seen some unscrupulous agencies do to make themselves look better. And
it'll skew all the data.
Yeah, it skews the data. I mean, if other agencies do it, that's kind of good for us because we can just point it out to clients and be like, hey, your agency is lying to you about the real performance over here. And you can prove that it's a lie because, for example, we saw that when these ads were launched for a client, we work on their sponsored brands, and this agency was doing the sponsored display. So literally from 1 month to the next, there was a jump of, I want to say $500,000 in sales or $750,000 in sales. But when you checked the sales month to month, there was definitely nowhere near $500,000 or $750,000 increase in sales, which showed that they're just taking credit for sales that happened anyways organically. Coming back, yeah, so good question. Coming back here to the match types. So the last one over here, broad match modified, exists only in sponsored brands. And essentially what you do is you put a plus sign in front of each keyword. So for example, office plus chair. And the way that Amazon then, sorry, you can't have a space, it has to be plus without a space, office plus chair. And then any search term, CSTs must include the words that have plus signs. Hold on. Okay, so let's expand this a little bit over here. So why don't you give me a few examples of keywords that would match to this? Some search terms, excuse me, that would match.
Without using the office or chair? Or like specifically using, I don't know, I would have to specifically use it. Large black chair.
Nope, that wouldn't match. Why would that not match?
Because you need office and chair?
Yes, exactly.
So black office chair.
Sure, you could get black office chair over here. Go ahead, give me another example.
Chair office red.
Chair office red, yes, exactly. Good, give me another example.
I can go all day.
You can go all day.
Office chair comfortable.
Yeah. But the idea is it's not just in like this. You could also have something before, right? You could have black chair for modern office with footrest, right? So you've got something before, you've got something in the middle, and you got something after. And that would still match because what you said is I want office to definitely be in the search term. I want chair to definitely be in the search term. And that's what Amazon gave you. It didn't give it to you in the same order, right? So...
And this is like the negatives where you're not charged per keyword. You can add as many keywords here as you want without being charged extra.
When you target keywords, yes, you can target as many keywords as you want. You can both positive and negative keywords.
Okay.
You pay per click. So if somebody clicks the keyword, you pay for that click. Nobody clicked on it, you don't get charged. I will point out though that when you do this, or when you use broad match in general, because the order no longer matters, then you can get some doozies. For example,
I hear you, yeah.
Right, so that's probably not what most people have in mind when they're targeting plus office plus chair. But technically this matches to that keyword targeting. And so if you wanted to avoid this, it would be perhaps a little bit difficult to think of this ahead of time, but you could do it with sufficiently thorough keyword research ahead of time. The more realistic way to do it is to just get the campaign live and find these irrelevant search terms in your search term report after a while.
Okay.
Okay, so let's just summarize what we said over here, and we'll call it a day. So within a campaign, you can have keywords and you can have search terms, but they're not the same thing. A keyword is something that you target deliberately, whether that's positive targeting, meaning I want to show up, I want my ads to be shown when somebody searches this, okay? Or a negative keyword that says I don't want to show up when somebody searches this or searches a search term that includes this, okay?
Yep.
And you can set your bids for keywords, you can raise them, you can lower them, okay? With search terms, this is what the customer searched. It's not your target, this is the outcome of your targeting, right? So if I put it perhaps differently, this is the input, right? And the search term is the output.
Isn't the search term almost like more like of a trigger?
The search term will trigger your ad to show. Yeah, but you need to be specific in what you're saying a trigger for, because
okay. Yeah.
the search term doesn't trigger your keyword. It might trigger your ad. If you want, if you will, you can say that there's a chain. Keyword makes you eligible to show up on a search term. And if Amazon decides that your ad is good enough, then that will trigger the ad impression for your ad, right? So just make that nuance. The trigger term is not necessarily so clear, so I'd just be a little bit cautious with that.
Okay.
Okay. Then with the match types, you said there's exact match. You can have these exact words. It's supposed to be in this order with nothing before or after. Phrase match, you can have things before or after in this order. In practice, they're not so much respecting the order anymore, but I haven't seen where they're putting things in the middle. And with broad match, then it's virtually anything goes unless you restrict things down to broad match modified, which, like we said, is only for sponsored brands. I will say that there's times where if you have a lot of intent match going on in exact match or phrase match, then broad match modified can actually be the more restrictive targeting type compared to the other ones, because it definitely requires your keyword to show up in the search term. And so depending on the context, that can be a safer bet than exact or phrase because of intent matching. Intent matching has gotten a lot better. Years ago, it was really awful. We were working with Kevin King as a client. He had this brand of alcohol wipes, and he'd done really well at the start of Corona, but then I forget the exact circumstances, but I think just a lot of cheap competitors came on. He ended up being a little overstocked, and we tried to help him with that, but it was just like a losing battle, unfortunately, for basically a lot of reasons that don't have to do with him, just how the market changed over there. And I remember we had this keyword we were targeting, I think like alcohol wipes or something, and Amazon matched that to Hulu, like the TV streaming service in the States. So it used to be completely nonsense, really random. Their idea of related was a big joke. And then in the past 6 months, we came back to it kind of by accident, to be perfectly honest, but it turned out to be a happy accident. And we've been launching a lot of broad match unmodified or just regular broad match campaigns for that reason. And so
I have a small question.
Yeah.
Like earlier you mentioned like you gave an example of advertiser Jon versus advertiser Jacob, and how the CPM, like the cost for the advertiser is different based off like the success about how specific your search or your targeting is.
Yeah.
Would that mean that when it comes to match types, would you recommend going for a more specific target, like use more often the exact match as opposed to the broad match?
That's a good question. Which exact match should you use? It depends on a lot of things. It's not a short question. I'll give you some factors for consideration. One, is it a product launch or is it a mature product? If it's a product launch, so you want to get as much traffic as possible so that you can get the sales moving, try to get yourself to a place where you can rank organically. And this is, again, I don't recommend doing product launch immediately before you've gotten reviews. And so I would make campaigns with all the match types in a situation like that. If it's more mature, then I would probably use exact or phrase on some of the category defining keywords. For example, office chair, I would probably target both in exact and in phrase. Broad match possibly also, but maybe more just using longer keywords, for example, modern office chair, black office chair, and so on phrase. But the trend is on Amazon that they want you to give them more control over the targeting. And the reason is because if everybody just targets exact match office chair, for example, right, then they have few or no advertisers for these search terms like black chair for modern office with footrest and recliner chair for office waiting room. Therefore, they make less money on all of those long tail search terms, and accordingly, they're giving people more traffic, even on the exact match, if you target with broad or with phrase, or even with automatic or category targeting. And it's not random, it's in order to draw more advertisers to the long tail, which makes it a more efficient market for them, which allows them to earn more again on a cost per thousand basis, because again, it's an auction system. So if you only have to pay a penny more than the next guy, and then there's only one other guy, so that's not a very efficient market. But if the next guy is competing pretty tightly with you, and then there's another 2 or 3 guys just beyond that, so that's much tighter competition, and you won't have a big bid gap between advertising Jon and Jacob, because there's also Ruben, Steve, Mike, and Stacy in their advertising as well. So you would want to use the match types that give more control to Amazon increasingly, because that's just how Amazon is changing the rules of the game, obviously for their benefit. It does also benefit advertisers if you know how to bid and price your traffic in a profitable way.
Okay. How much do you suggest being like investing in looking into your competitors, like researching what your competitor is doing, or like how many competitors and things like that?
Good question.
How do you know when to stop?
Yeah. How do you know when to stop? So definitely when you're starting out with a product or a product line, it's a good idea to research your competitors, because they've already done the work, and so why reinvent the wheel? If they're targeting a keyword and your product is pretty similar to theirs, there's a good chance it applies to you as well. And 2 minds are better than 1, so why just rely on yourself?
Can you see other people's campaigns though? Like, are advertisement campaigns
You cannot see directly into their campaigns. What you can see is you can just search a bunch of keywords or have virtual assistants or tools scrape Amazon to see what keywords your competitors are showing up for, and that'll give you an idea. You can just look at the listing itself, right? Because sellers know that they need to put their keywords in the product titles and in the bullets that they write to describe their products. And so if you see words there that sound like something people might search for, then you can add that to your list as, hey, maybe we should put this in our listing as well, provided obviously that it's relevant, right? I wouldn't put padded armrests if your office chair doesn't have armrests or the armrests aren't padded, for example, right? But provided that they are, then yeah. So how much, right? So how much competitor research do you want to do? So eventually there's just diminishing marginal returns on doing that competitor research, because you have a pretty good idea of who the competitors are, what they've got in their listings, and what people are searching for. So I wouldn't necessarily keep on trying to discover what keywords they're using. Where competitor research tends to be more useful over time, even to repeat it, is on things such as messaging, because there's almost always new advertisers, and there's new pricing and new pricing strategies. So keeping in touch with what is going on, what is the average price point in your market, can help you get an idea why, for example, conversion rates might be increasing or lowering depending on how your price is relative to the market. What are the average ratings and review scores in the market compared to you, right, for your main keywords? When you have an idea about that stuff, that can help you to interpret a increase in sales, a decrease in sales providing you're measuring consistently week to week and month to month. So that's where that stuff can be more useful. We can get into that hopefully later. So we've been at this for a while. Thank you for your time. I hope you guys watching this at home or in your office chairs are benefiting. And we'll be back tomorrow with another training episode. We're 11 Ads for Brands, specialists in Amazon sponsored brands, as well as home decor and furnishings.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, Elisha. Take care.
Yeah. David.
Testing. Elisha, you want to say hi?
Hello.